All right. So I am the editor-in-chief, co-publisher, co-founder of the Mac Observer. I am the host of Apple Context Machine these days, now that Jeff Gamet has moved on. And when I speak, if you see me speak at Silicon Valley Mug, I tend to do off-the-cuff presentations on whatever is topical. And it's kind of like a podcast, but without someone else to speak to. Speaking of not much of a chance, let's start with one of my favorite topics, the car. I think one of the first times I spoke publicly about Apple Car was at Silicon Valley Mug, and it was not too long after I had met someone working on it. Actually met several someones who were employed by Apple. Actually, one person who was applying to Apple to work on it. And by the way, fun process. He had to basically spend about 40 hours solving a problem for free. And that was like step 2 of the application. I think he ended up blowing it off, but some of his friends were already working for Apple on the project. And so that was how I knew for a fact that Apple was doing something. And then we went through a period where Tim basically put Bob Mansfield in charge of the product. And Bob Mansfield is a legendary engineering god. Who was in sort of semi-retirement working on quote-unquote special projects, but Tim Cook sort of talked him into coming back and actually heading up Project Titan and actually figuring out what we understand is he was trying to figure out if Project Titan could even be salvaged. And Project Titan being the overall name of this autonomous electric vehicle that Apple was working on. From there, we know that when Tim Cook was asked about cars, he said something that is really stuck with me. And that is that there were 3 things happening in the automobile industry that he thought was interesting. And the first one was electric vehicles. And the second one was autonomous vehicles. And the third thing was ride sharing. And he said that somewhere in the intersection of those 3 things was a very interesting place to be. And that's usually code for we're working on it and we're not going to tell you anything else. So Tim hasn't spoken about that in a while. And we got stories that Bob Mansfield had canned a bunch of people, moved a bunch of people around, eliminated whole teams. And it seemed like it really radically scaled back what Apple was doing. And then we start getting all these reports about Apple having vehicles on the road testing an autonomous vehicle system. And I think they were Lexuses at first, and then they became Audis. That's my memory on that. And it's the thing where they've got the car and they've got the LiDAR cameras and whatnot on top and spinning stuff. And there were lots of stories about people seeing them on the roads. And then we got reports about Apple applying for. There's a facility here in the Bay Area that used to be a military base. And it was part of a military base that had houses and other buildings. And so you've got streets and you've got corners and you've got stop signs. And it has become a place where a lot of autonomous vehicle testing is done. And we know that Apple applied for permission to use that, got that permission, and was actually using it. So again, we know that Apple's been working on something in the car world for years, but we didn't know what. And for a while, it even kind of seemed like Apple may simply be working on the autonomous system, perhaps like CarPlay, maybe, where they would license it out to other cars. And I've not had a firm opinion on what was on where that was going, and none of my sources had any information for that. But now today, and I think I wrote it up 4 or 5 hours ago, there's a report from the Economic News Day, I think is what they're called. It's a Chinese publication in Taiwan that published a piece based on reports from the auto parts supply chain. I'm trying to find my own story on this. And those reports says that Apple's going to ship a car in September of this year. And I am highly skeptical that that's actually the case. When it comes to these kinds of stories, there are Digitimes, the END, Economic News Daily, the other Chinese publications, even things that Ming Chi Kuo publishes. They usually have sources somewhere in Apple supply chain that are willing to talk, often for money. And the question kind of becomes what to do with that information. Like, I believe personally, if Digitimes has a story that's based on Apple's supply chain, I tend to believe that there is absolutely something true in that story 100% of the time. Now, the conclusions that Digitimes reaches may be questionable sometimes. And, and that's in part because Digitimes, it turns out, doesn't have the big picture. All they've got is some little tiny sliver of a component. Tim Cook has talked about this, talked about how their supply chain is so vast that anyone claiming to know what Apple is doing based upon what 1 or 2 or 3 suppliers are leaking, they probably don't know what they're talking about. But there's probably something truthful in the original leak. And that is probably the case here. They cited multiple auto suppliers who all said that Apple suddenly ramped up requests or orders for parts. And again, they're saying that Apple's going to ship a car in September 2021. I kind of doubt it. It doesn't make any sense to me that we would not have heard of something as large as a car being manufactured, ready to ship in 10 months. Information about that car should have already leaked if it was a thing. So what Apple is going to do with these parts, I don't know, but I do believe that Apple has ramped up some kind of order for parts. Again, it's just what they're going to do with it is the part that remains to be seen. And then we also don't know if this is going to be a car for us to buy or if this is going to be a car for Apple's, Apple Car Plus. They would probably name it something confusing like that, right? Like how many Apple TVs do we need? We need Apple TV, and then we need Apple TV, and then we need Apple TV Play. All right. So anyway, Apple's going to could well be building a car solely for it to use for ride sharing, for autonomous vehicle ride sharing. That is possible. It's also possible that Apple would do the same thing, would do both, like sell the car and also develop its own fleet, or do like what Tesla was doing, which Tesla was leasing out cars that when they were returned at the end of the lease, Tesla was going to use for its own fleet of ride-sharing cars. Now, I don't think anything in particular has come of that, but that was an announcement that Tesla made, and it seems to be really, really smart to me. You let your consumer pay for a big chunk of the manufacturing costs directly, and then you turn around and just have that car make money for you until it falls apart. And that kind of seems like a good business model to me. So an Apple car is coming. I'm sure of it. I don't think it's going to come in 2021. I think there was another story. I didn't have time to dig into it. There's another story that broke just a couple hours ago saying that Apple's real time frame is 2024. That feels a lot better to me. It seems to make more sense. But I don't know, but we will see. So since we were taking polls, who would be interested in buying an Apple car? Figure it's going to cost $50,000 to $70,000 to start. So I got 3 hands. My hand. I would try. So we got 4, 5 hands, and a couple of which I get. What's that?
Not the 1.0.
Yes. But regardless, I look forward to seeing what Apple's gonna do. I mean, can they push this space? Apple tends to only do products where it's controlling something. So what is it controlling? Is it controlling the software in this case? Is it controlling some element of what the car is made of? Is it controlling some user design, user interface issue that Apple's come up with? I don't know, but I'm hoping that Apple can push the space forward, just like Tesla has pushed the space forward.
I got a question.
Yes.
Have you ever heard of a thing called a quantum glass battery? One that was supposed to charge in about 5 or 6 minutes and have 1,000-mile range.
That sounds fantastic. Well, I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, start researching that because
Sure.
it's coming up on the network. I've been investigating a little bit, and they give me generalizations, but they won't give me specifics who's making it. Now, one of the things about the battery is the fact that you could actually fire bullets through it, and it'll still run.
Wow.
Yeah, and the dielectric in the middle is some kind of a very refined glass, and it'll eliminate the lithium ions because they explode and do all that kind of stuff. And it's just nothing but pluses that I hear about this battery.
That sounds really interesting. It sounds like it'd be a big advancement. Linda?
To go along with that, I have heard talk of the thing that is going to be extraordinary about Apple's car is the battery itself. Now, I did not hear the details that this gentleman just said, but yeah.
And by the way, rumor has it that Apple, Microsoft, Chevron, several of the big companies are already investing in this organization.
Very, very interesting. That kind of range would be a real game changer for sure. And if Apple can control availability of that, that would be. So he may be calling if I'm going to hold him for a bit. Yes.
Yeah. I'll toss one more thought. I have no idea if this has any bearing, but what about Apple's need for cars and loss of sensing for their mapping initiatives, particularly Street View and the enhanced mapping?
They would. I'm sure they would use their own car for that if they had a car, but they're not going to make a car to do that. That seems like it'd be crazy.
It seems to me that Apple's whole style is to come out with luxury, beautiful products, which seems to me kind of antithetical to autonomous rideshare, which is more like land shuttle capsule type vehicles. And with Waymo and the GM Cruise venture and Amazon has bought Zoox. All three of those have already gotten permits for operating on the streets as fully autonomous test vehicles without safety drivers. It would seem that Apple wouldn't even be in the running for that, nor would I think they would want to be particularly.
Well, I strongly disagree with that from the standpoint as following standpoints, I guess. The first is that Apple's never first to market, right? They always let everybody else come to market and then kind of show everybody else how to do it either better, right, or at least more expensively. And shush, buddy. And at the same time, if I get what you're saying about like competing against a whole bunch of other people. It's just the thing is this. I believe that within 50 years, private car ownership is going to be for the rich. And that the rest of us are going to be very, very happy not having a garage and not parking our cars on the streets. And that fewer cars are probably going to be made. And that the fewer cars will be needed. And that to me seems like a better future. And it seems like the kind of future that Apple would want to contribute to. But everything you said about Apple competing against these other companies, that's certainly valid. But I think that there's still room for Apple to do this, especially if they can do it better. And I don't know, I'd rather take a ride in a nice Apple car than in a Hyundai. I don't know. No disrespect to Hyundai, but I'd rather take a ride in a Tesla if I could too. It's supposed to be really nice cars. So regardless, though, it seems like there's more interest than the last time I talked about this. So I look forward to to seeing what happens, and I'm thinking the other people are too. Oh, let's talk briefly. Like, Apple's already worth so much money. How much money is Apple going to be worth if they have a line of cars that sells, more than like 10,000 model units a year? I mean, like, Apple is in the process of becoming so big that it could easily put the company in the crosshairs of regulators from the standpoint of breaking them up. Most of the big tech breakup that's noise that's coming from both the right and the left these days is really kind of aimed more at Google, Facebook, maybe Amazon, maybe Twitter, which, I mean, breaking up Twitter, that doesn't make any sense. But we hear some people complaining about Apple's App Store, like Linda mentioned during the news section, with various companies whining about having to pay Apple, and various companies whining about not being able to have their own App Store. So with I don't know. At the same time, maybe Apple sells so many iPhones and makes so much money from iPhones that even a very successful car business would still be just another drop in a very, very big ocean of money. But it could really start changing the landscape about how governments, especially governments that sort of want a piece of the pie, how they look at Apple, and I don't really know what would happen from that. Yes, Linda?
I don't think, well, at least the way current antitrust laws are, et cetera, they're usually about taking a market and having a monopoly in the market and taking advantage of that monopoly. That's U.S. laws. The
Right.
EU has a different set. And the thing that Apple has done, I mean, Apple's got, and you may know this better than me, I don't, but if I had to take a guess, it used to be that they would say that Android has 80% of the smartphone market. So Apple only has 20%, let's say, maybe 50% in the US. And so although they make more money, they don't even have even the start of a monopoly. And the car thing, even if the car thing is very lucrative, there are hardly, I mean, you've got Tesla, you've got GM, you've got BMW, Mercedes, Audi, all these other car companies. There's no way they're close to. So I think they're going to have to do something, more predatory or something in order to run. I mean, just having a large market cap is not going to, even the world's largest is not going to.
I hear you, Linda. And I very much am in agreement with you, but there are people who incorrectly throw around the idea that Apple has a monopoly on apps, iOS apps, which is ridiculous. And the thing that should normally get a company in trouble is as you alluded to, Linda, it's leveraging monopoly or monopoly power from one market to gain share in another market. And that's what Microsoft did with Internet Explorer, and it got them in trouble. And it's not what Apple has done with any of its products. And yet Apple still got in trouble with the DOJ under the Obama administration for iTunes pricing, iBooks pricing.
Right.
So
that's because they were making agreements with other booksellers.
But they were still a minority player in the space.
True.
And
what was that? That was deemed anti-competitive. Uh-oh, doggy.
I am so sorry about.
That's okay. That's right.
He
simply escalated the conversation.
He really wants to go out, so he's gonna have to wait though. All right, so
So Brian, I have a question. Can I throw in a question?
Of course.
So I assume I have to wonder whether you're absolutely right on all these things because of that row of crystal balls over your shoulder there. Can you tell us what the story with those are?
I love glass baubles. I absolutely and positively love glass baubles. I don't think I have a battery in it, or I would turn it on and show it to you. The three ones on the second shelf on this closest to me all have laser engraved astronomical. Like one's the Milky Way, and one's the universe, and one is our solar system. And it's when you shine a light through it, just the specks glow. It is glorious. The snow globes, the other three are big balls, are snow globes from a company called Cool Snow Globes, and they make the best snow globes. They're just amazing. And then the big glowy thing is a moon that levitates through magnets, because I'm 12 and I just think that that's the coolest thing ever. And yeah, thank you for asking. So let's talk about M1 Max. Let's move on to that. Apple was long rumored to be doing this. I think this is another topic that I spoke about ahead of time at Silicon Valley here at the Mug. And lo and behold, Apple did it. And what is more interesting to me is that Apple apparently did it incredibly well. Apple has dropped this bomb into the middle of the CPU world and just blown everybody away. And I remember specifically talking about and worrying about whether or not Apple would be able to make a processor that was powerful enough for the Mac. And it's like, yeah, I hope they can. I hope they can. And it turns out they did. And the M1 processor has blown everybody away. Its performance is blowing everybody away. Emulated performance is blowing everybody away. Graphics performance is blowing everybody away. And this is just the first one, the M1. We're going to see, I hope this year we're going to see an M1.X or an M2 in an iMac. And then hopefully we'll end up getting the Mac Pro, and we'll get bigger MacBook Pros, all with a different version of Apple's processor in them. And it just seems like it seems like they're fantastic devices. And I have already been recommending to people not to buy an Intel Mac going forward. If you have to, of course, get it, because it's going to be very usable for quite a while. But if you can wait for an M1 version of the Mac that you want, I recommend doing so. And if you're looking at one of the shipping devices like the MacBook Air or the 13-inch MacBook Pro, and you're trying to choose between the M1 and the Intel version, get the M1 version 100%. That is where Apple's future is. It's where Apple's focus is going to be. Its resource development is going to be, development resources are going to be spent working on. And I think that software developers have been very, very quick to embrace this platform and are making everybody happy too. Are there any questions about the M1? Have you already talked about that in prior?
Do you expect M1 Max to be able to run earlier versions of Mac OS in virtualization? For example, I run 32-bit apps on a 13-inch mid-20 Intel with Mojave, running in Parallels, desktop.
If it can be done, Parallels will do it. I definitely respect them and their engineering abilities. I suspect that Apple is going to leave that to companies like Parallels and VMware, so that Apple doesn't have to mess with it. And I'm gonna hedge one more time. Yes, I do expect it, but I haven't tested it, and I don't know for sure. It just seems like something that would easily be able to happen. And like I said, Apple is most likely to leave that up to Parallels and VMware. They may or may not help them. They probably will help them with it, but it'll be basically only supported through the third-party companies rather than through Apple.
What do you see as the implications of the M1 Mac? So now evidently Amazon is also going to be doing, I guess, their servers using ARM chips. And Microsoft is talking about it. So what do you see? Does this help Apple with market share with Macs? What do you think?
Well, yes. I mean, Apple making machines that are faster than everything else. I mean, like, when's the last time that's ever happened, right? I mean, we've always, as Mac users, since probably the earliest days of the Mac versus Intel, PowerPC versus Intel x86 wars when Apple was clearly hands down faster, but then started losing ground as Motorola and AIM both lost interest in that fight. Stop, dude. Please. I'm so sorry. It's been a very long time since Apple was making the fastest. What's that, Kim?
A puppy, and I learned to keep a constant supply of bully sticks around while I was on the phone.
Yeah, I should actually. Yeah, that's such a great idea. Thank you, Kim. Give me just a second. All right, so back to M1s. I do expect emulation to cover running previous versions, but we haven't actually seen it yet, so don't actually know yet. But I just, it's hard to imagine a world where that doesn't happen. There's just going to be money to be made by VMware, by Parallels. They're going to be able to make money by providing that solution. Apple could make money allowing it to, but Apple doesn't probably care about that money, and so they'll leave it to them, and it'll probably work just fine. Any other questions about M1s?
On a wider scale with that, there has been the suggestion if Apple's M1 chips are this much faster and more efficient than whatever Intel has to offer, that so many other manufacturers are going to view that as the way to go, and suddenly Intel is losing its place as the center of the personal computing industry.
Yeah, and Apple is taking that place as the center, even if Apple doesn't even have majority market share, which Apple doesn't and is probably never going to, because of prices. It is an interesting thing. We are in the middle of a sort of sea change in the computing world, and again, this is the first one. This is the M1. Like, it only supports up to 16 gigs of RAM, right? I mean, this isn't the MX processor that's going to be in the Mac Pro. I mean, like, just imagine what an M-based Mac Pro is going to look like. And that could be really, really interesting. And the same thing with the iMacs and the larger MacBook Pros. I think that we probably would have. I think that the larger, the 16-inch in particular MacBook Pro is probably going to have the next generation of this processor, or we would have already seen it. Could be wrong. It turns out Apple doesn't consult with me on its design process, but I think that if they were intending to put, this is the way I'll put this, that if they were intending to put the M1 in more Macs, we probably would have seen them already. So, can't wait to see the M2 or the M1.5 or the M1Z or, however Apple ends up naming it. Can't wait to see what those do. And I'm looking forward to, so I'm actually talking to you on Logitech 4K webcam, but on a 2019 iMac 5K. And I am absolutely going to get an M1 iMac as soon as I possibly can. Can't wait to see it. Oh, I also, by the way, ordered a pair of AirPods Max. They haven't arrived yet, or I would tell you what they sound like, but I am one of the Dilrods who actually bought one of those. So maybe next time I'm on, we could talk about that. Any other questions about the M1?
Did you say that that if money mattered and I was in the market for a Mac Mini, that you would recommend waiting for the second version, or you'd snap up the M1?
No, yeah. If you need an iMac, if you need a Mac Mini now, get the M1 version. I don't care how cheap the Intel version is. Get the M1 version. I think it's worth the money, and it's going to last you longer, because again, that's where Apple's focus is right now. And that's the big thing with this is that especially if you're not the type to get new machines, whenever you can, and you want to buy a machine, you want to keep it, and you want to use it, you're going to get more life out of the M1 for whichever model it is that you're getting.
Even though it has less ports than the Intel one?
Sure, get a hub.
Yeah, I'm still my Mac Mini late 2012 is still going still going strong. It's like the most reliable machine I've ever had, but I can't move past Catalina on it.
Yeah, and Big Sur is not perfect. I've had some personal issues with mail search, but I think that is probably specific to me and not specific to Big Sur. Big Sur is a great update, and if you're all sitting on the sidelines waiting for Big Sur, I think the 11.1 version is good to go. I definitely recommend it. All right, let's move on to another topic. Well, actually,
while we're thinking on M1s, what's your feeling about RAM on these things? I mean, the fact that Apple put these machines out with only 8 gigs of RAM is just flummoxed a lot of people.
well, me and Dave Hamilton. Dave Hamilton's my business partner at TMO. He's also the co-host of the Mac Geek Gab. He likes to go on about 8 is enough, and he's not talking about the TV show that many of us probably watched. He says that 8 gigs of RAM is enough, and I say ballerdash. I have 64 gigs of RAM in this thing, and Safari, what is Safari using right now? Safari is using only 7 gigs right now. Earlier today, it was at 20.
Ooh.
And while SSDs, Dave's point is that SSDs are fast enough that virtual memory becomes almost indistinguishable from regular memory in terms of effective speed for we, the users. I disagree with that, at least depending on how you're using your machine. Now, for instance, Safari is a RAM hog, and I do have 17 windows open with an average of probably 5 tabs per window. And that's why my machine gobbles up RAM. But my point is that that's how I like to use my machine. I like to have all of these. I've got something coming in from Russia, so I've got 2 windows monitoring the shipping process of that. I want to keep that open because that's how I want to use my Mac. So I've got 64 gigs, and I still end up having some RAM related issues. That said, what Apple is doing on the M1 processor, where the RAM is actually integrated in with the chip itself, the system on a chip, it could be so amazingly fast that 16 gigs, or I don't recommend 8 gigs, but 16 gigs is probably enough for the vast majority of us. That is certainly possible. I haven't tested it myself. I don't have one of these devices myself yet, but everybody is singing the praises of these things. But to your bigger question, Charles, surely that limitation is why we saw the M1 released on these 3 devices, the MacBook Air, the 13-inch MacBook Pro, and the Mac Mini. Surely the next wave of Macs that get these is going to have a version of the M processor that supports more RAM or has more RAM. And surely when the Mac Pro comes out, it will actually support installable RAM. Surely. I don't know that that's the case, but surely. I guess only time will tell on that. Or I guess Apple could do it like if you got 2 processors, you could get 16 gigs of RAM in both of them, so you'd have 32 gigs. You actually have 2 M.X processors. But I don't know. A lot remains to be seen with that. It does seem like for the class of devices that was released, that the 8 and 16 gig options are seemingly to be enough for people. Any other questions?
In general, it seems to be that these low-end machines are typically meant for use as like for your email, web browsing, and maybe music playback, and iTunes, and that's about
writing
it.
Letters and pages, maybe simple spreadsheets. Most people are not using a Mac the way I'm using it, and most people are probably not using their Macs the way everyone in any Mac user group is probably going to be making more use of their Macs than a whole lot of other Mac customers out there. you know, we are all by nature geeks to some level or another. Said with love and respect, by the way, in case anyone thought I was actually being snarky. I'm not. I have this dry delivery, and you know. Anyway, so any other questions? Any other thoughts?
I think we should. I would love to keep going for another hour, but I think we should probably let you go and give you over to the puppy, and stick a little closer to our time.
Yeah. Okay.
But,
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure. Like I said, I wish I could have been there with you in person, but I'm so glad we can at least do this.
yeah.
And hopefully Linda will have me back soon.
Oh yeah, would love to. Okay.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody. Cheers.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you, Brian.
Christmas.
Yeah. Happy Christmas, everybody.
Yeah.
Awesome hat.
Same to you.
Thank you.